Hey, what's up, peeps? What's up? What's happening? Hello, everyone. I'm
Hey
Kay,
everyone, Rye here, Chai here.
and we are back after some time away. I know you guys must miss us, right? Today, we are going to have a conversation that has been on our minds for a while. We have spent a significant amount of time away from the screen, but have been brainstorming some ideas for content. And one of the things that have been on the top of our brains is Korea's relationship to hip hop. And that is hip hop culture in Korea specifically, and a bit of Japan as well. Um, Many questions come to mind as we explore this topic, of course, and we have witnessed profound popularity in South Korean hip hop scene. For those listening in, it may be a surprise to hear how emblems of African American culture have traveled so far to the easternmost part of the world, but its existence is quite interesting. In today's talk, we intend on highlighting elements of this subculture and inform our inquiries about cultural appropriation and authenticity. We will also bring out several examples and perspectives we have observed, as well as other perspectives that span across the globe, especially international fans, but certainly not limited to them.
Yeah, I think that this is a really big topic, and international fans of K-hip hop and K-pop in general tend to have really diverse opinions about it. Um, the very first thing that pops into my mind when I think of this topic currently, because it's been living rent free in my brain for a few weeks now. And it's a video that we've actually mentioned once before on this channel. I wasn't very nice about it, and I won't be today either. But um, this is the Chancellor Babylon 12, I think is how you pronounce it. It's like TWLV, BB, etc. There's like 6 different hip hop artists that came together to create the song. There's a music video for it where they all, show up. And that video affected me, to say the least. When I first saw it, my immediate reaction was, oh my God, those terrible braids on Babylon. Um, that doesn't like exclude Chancellor's own, like, I think he had like twists or something. It was the men in that video were really going for something. Um, but anyway, so these hairstyles in particular immediately brought to mind the question of cultural appropriation, which I think among our generation in particular is, I mean, the conversation has really taken off, right, in recent years. I don't think that it was as, vocally discussed in the past as it is now. Um, Maybe because of the internet. We have access to these conversations, right? Um, and I am not an authority on hip hop. I'm also not an authority on Black culture, Black American culture, for obvious reasons. um, but do, I think, fall under the opinion that there are some issues with cultural appropriation in K-pop and in K-hip hop as well. And I don't know if K-hip hop gets called out quite as often as K-pop does, actually. If a K-pop artist has box braids or something like that, people are pretty quick to be like, hey, stop, think about this. I don't know if that message always gets through to the artists. Uh, there have been artists in the past that have gotten very defensive over it. Um, but overall, I think that Korean hip hop often gets a bit of a pass, and I don't know if that's because it's less popular than K-pop in general. Um, but I don't know, Chai, if maybe you want to kind of jump into what you like maybe what you've witnessed. Do you have any examples of people getting a little
Defensive.
touchy? Yeah.
Oh yeah, the first one that comes to my head was Jackson, who I don't know what I think it was. I don't know if it was a music video or an ad, but he had dreads in his hair, and people called him out for it. And his response was along the lines of, "Everybody does it. It's just a hairstyle. Why are you, reprimanding me for having this hairstyle that we literally see other people doing, right?" And I'm assuming by other people he was referring to Black artists that he follows, or Black artists in the musical genre that he also participates in. So that's kind of like, I think as of right now, like that's the biggest example. But I also take your point, Rai, of like seeing when culture appropriation is talked about, it's often in reference to K-pop in and of itself. So I think about like groups that participate in like some sort of, Black aesthetic, whether it's like dreads or braids. And by braids, because I think we can all agree that people can have great braids. There are different kinds of braids, but I think literally like the cornrow styles or the typical braids hairstyles that you would see on Black individuals, I think is what we're referring to, because I don't want people being like, well, everybody wears braids. It's like, yes, but there is a particular type of braid that is mostly, seen within the Black community. I don't know if you can hear my background because my mom is doing something. So let me know, because I could stop to make sure. But yes, you're right. Like Vikings had braids and like things like that. But I also see in a way how people will like look at K-pop more in terms of like the linkage with cultural appropriation versus like those who exist within the hip hop scene in Korea, and saying, it's fine, which I think we're going to actually touch on whether or not that is actually fine, but it's fine because they actually participate in the cultural element in and of itself. Like it's literally in the name, K hip hop. So that's the kind of music that they're actually making. So them having these kind of cultural elements or it's Black aesthetics makes sense, as opposed to like people in K-pop that are, making more of like a whole variety of different songs, but like one moment they have braids in and the next moment they don't. And it's just like flipping through that back and forth and things like that. And whether that or not that is a good or bad thing, I think in a way gets at to the question, is there, cultural appropriation in K-pop, or is it fair to call Koreans who participate, Korean artists rather, who participate in either K-pop as the larger apparatus or hip hop in and of itself, cultural appropriation? Which one is more appropriative than another, and why? So, in a way, Rai, you started talking about this, but I want to get Kay in so that we can hear her thoughts. But then also, given that I asked the question, Rai, you can also think about like the difference in the groups. But Kay?
Yeah, I feel like that was a very loaded question, and I might not have all my thoughts together right at this second. But like, what I think connects to your point in your question about what is more appropriate, and then your previous point about like the labels, right? Like how we label this music genre, if it is a genre. I mean, obviously it is, but we label it as K hip hop, right? Why isn't it just hip hop? And I think we've had a previous discussion in one of our other talks about if it's I'm sorry, not appropriate, appropriative. Thanks for that clarification. I do think that it takes some digging, right? So I'm only going to go based off of some examples that I've seen happening within the K hip hop industry, because that's something that I enjoy watching and seeing and taking part in, because there are so many artists that I listen to on a daily basis that I think are doing a really good job in terms of like my appreciation for them participating in this genre of music that's so familiar to me, right? And one that I would say is Wu Jay, and we talked about him in our own like private conversations. I'm also thinking about Yoon Mi-rae. I'm also thinking about kind of some of the members from Make It Rain, right? that is like shout out to shout out to Blue, shout out to all the homies that make it rain. Although I do not know them personally, but that's how I feel, right? Like that's how I feel whenever I listen to their music, because there's some sort of like commonality, right? And I think with hip hop, people enjoy hip hop on the basis of that. Being able to relate to someone and their experience versus just copying or copycatting, or just like being someone who's overly boisterous and like have a aggressive tone, just like putting on all these different stereotypes that people allude hip hop to be, simply because of like one strain of hip hop that they've observed and like contained and consumed at one time, at one point in time, because they can just name one hip hop artist and forget like hip hop is a broad genre, right? There's so many different avenues that hip hop can go into. And so my only question about if it's appropriative, I think it could be, simply because of the different emblems of African American culture that have been taken in, and I think that's very, how should I say? I think that's pretty detrimental, right? And it's detrimental to the fact because it's not giving homage to the people that started it, right? Not that I expect them to write in their rap songs, oh, Kanye did it for me, although that's all they know. Kanye did it for me, or Biggie did it for me, or Tupac did it for me, and things of that nature, which it could be true, but we have no real way of making certain that they have that connection because of us knowing that maybe they come from backgrounds of families that have money and they feel pretty sustained, and they are not typically living the lifestyle that most rappers live, right? It's a how do you call it, posers, like, you're putting on a face or a mask to say that you're down. And I think that hip hop does give people kind of the social capital, the ability to like live socially comfortable. So like having money, having fast cars, having girls, like living this particular lifestyle that is not always true for many African American rappers that are not mainstream, right? And I'm saying mainstream because like name droppers, like you can drop Drake's name, you can drop Kanye's name, you can drop all these people's names. But then again, I'm thinking back to like the K part, right? That's very important, right? K makes it very specific, and K makes it super. It's an identity marker. Let me just put it that way. K stands for Korean. So if I was to say, if I at any point in my life was to say that I want to become a Korean hip hop or a K hip hop artist, people might look at me sideways. Like, you're not Korean. You might know Korean, right? You might know how to speak and sing and to Korean music, or the language, and you might know the culture to a certain extent. But because phenotypically I do not resemble someone that is Korean, although it's hip hop and I am African American and I come from that origin where it is acceptable for me to participate in hip hop, simply because of my allegiance and my race, I think that speaks volumes. And I think that might have to do with this conversation about cultural appropriation, because it can rightfully so just be hip hop music, right? And it could be you talking about something that is important to you in your life, and you think that many people can connect to it, and they feel that what you're speaking to them is true, and they want to aspire to live a lifestyle that's similar to yours, because even though that you might have came from the same like humbling background, you were able to come out of it, and you were able to become successful, and you were able to talk about it and like represent all these people. So I feel like we're treading on some some harsh questions there when it comes to seeing if we can describe this phenomenon as cultural appropriation, or is this being less authentic than one? So I'm actually curious to see, Rai, if you want to go ahead and take the next stand in this question.
Sure. I've already said that I do think that there's a cultural appropriation problem in in K-pop and K-hip hop. And I base that largely on the way I understand cultural appropriation, just in general, right? And that being that it, like, borrowing from certain cultures and subcultures is generally not frowned upon, as long as those same, statements and symbols are not at the same time being treated as lesser in the larger society, and barring people from opportunities in the larger society, right? So, for example, it would be cultural appropriation to have dreads when there are, for a white person to have dreads, I'll say, obviously, when there are Black people who have dreads who are, being told that they have to get rid of them in order to be professional at work, and things of that nature. And as far as the Korean context, it actually brings me to a question of how are these same visual symbols being treated in daily life? If we think about Japanese context, we go back to that Nike ad that we've spoken about before. There was a Black hahu who was being, her classmates were touching her hair and treating her almost like a doll because of how other she was, right? And while those things are still happening on a large scale, it feels at the same time problematic to be part of, the ethnic majority, and the more, dominant culture, and to borrow these symbols as a fashion statement when people who have to live with these visual aspects their entire lives, are being treated as other and as lesser because of them, right? There's, not to get too academic with it, there's a theory of cultural hybridization, and I think it's Appropriation is the original author of that, or the originator of that. I could be wrong. Academic people out there, correct me. But that theory could theoretically apply in the case of Korean hip hop, in that here is this cultural medium for expression. It's being transported across borders and cultural lines, and it's being reimagined to fit its new environment. So Korean hip hop could very much be that, right? And a lot of the time I find that I believe that there are examples where that is absolutely what's happening, cultural hybridization. For instance, Kay, you mentioned Woo Won-jae, who was a contestant on Show Me the Money, I think. And rather than borrowing, say, curse words and, talking about money and girls, particularly in a very, like, body way, he used rap as a way to express his experience in Korea with the pressure to succeed and what success looks like in that cultural context. And that is, in my opinion, a case of cultural hybridization, where hip hop, rap, is being transported and used in a new context to express the experience that individuals who have lived their entire lives in that cultural context can relate to. They're speaking from their experience, from something that they've been wanting to say, something that they have been dealing with and will continue to deal with in their daily lives, right? On the other hand, if you have something like Automatic, which is full of a lot of American slang, degrading, some might say degrading language for women, things like that. Talks a lot about cars. I think there's kind of like a comparison between girls and cars in the song, which is and in that case, I find that to be more of an issue of commodification and appropriation. The women, as Chai is mentioning to me now, are being objectified, compared to cars, being treated as if they'd be impressed enough by the wealth as expressed through Ferraris to, drop their panties and, do whatever. That's what the song's about. I'm just saying, he's basically like, I'm rich. And that makes, and I can show you because here are all my Ferraris. They make the girls automatic. I don't. No hate to Chancellor, but kind of hate to Chancellor. General dislike toward the song for Chancellor and his entourage. So that's. I feel like there's definitely a distinction. Like I see people, artists in Korea, partaking in what I see as cultural hybridization, and I see those partaking in what I feel viscerally to be cultural appropriation. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that, Chai. I'm sure you have many.
I mean, I do, and I'm thinking about, both of your comments, and the thing that, because in a way, like, part of culture appropriation is taking elements of another culture that would have been immoralized, demonized, subjugated in a group of people where the culture emanates from. But also there is that question of authenticity, right? Like, you are not part of that culture, yet you are participating in this culture and either making bank from it or making it a fad or making it popular, whatever, and taking credit for it. Less about the credit, but the thing that I'm thinking about with authenticity, because I was like thinking about how we had this conversation previously, all three of us, in our private conversation about what hip hop was before, during like its creation during the 1970s in the West Bronx, and the elements of hip hop and what it meant at the time, but also how it had changed from the 1970s all the way to the 1990s. I'm going to stop here to give a disclaimer to everybody. I am not a hip hop know-it-all. I don't know a lot. I'm taking on information that was given to me by people who are older and has existed within the hip hop scene themselves, as well as a little bit of research. So I'm coming with a little bit of knowledge, but also understanding and being aware that I don't have that much knowledge. End of disclaimer. But you have this change in the way that hip hop was from, I won't say like the 1970s to the 1990s. It like grew, but it still remained true in of itself, of the element, like what it meant, what the purpose of hip hop was. To from the I would say mid 1990s to what we see now, there was a shift. I don't really understand what that shift was, because there was a lot of elements that contributed to the shift, but there was a shift that it went from talking about the experiences of Black people in the ghetto to expanding it or changing it to getting out of the ghetto to this like luxurious lifestyle. So it went from like, even though, like they were talking about in different smaller instances of like, police brutality and, the government and stuff like that, but it turned into like it went from like effing the system to F the system, I'm going to make it in it. Right. And then it also ended up coming into something of like objectification of women, women participating in objectification in order to make bank. So if you think about like video vixens, as well as like, like just people who like, I don't stand her, but she's great, I guess. But like people like Cardi B and like, Meg Thee Stallion, who like are talking about their body in a way that men are talking about their bodies. Why are my brothers blowing up? So sorry, I don't know if y'all hear that, but he's just like going off. But you know, like exactly, Kay, like sex sells, right? And so what ends up happening is that you have more of a conversation. Conversation is a strong word, but you have more of what's happening is where like sex becomes the foundation of hip hop, that in a way where it wasn't before. Even if there was probably, because I don't listen to a lot of like, you know, older hip hop songs, but sex probably was in the equation, but the fundamental goal of it wasn't what we see now. That is all to say though, is if we're looking at K hip hop now, or K-pop, and well, let's leave K-pop alone. Let's say like K hip hop. And what we're noticing is that they are talking about objectification, or they're talking about what they're seeing in American media right now. Can we say that in a way that they are being authentic to hip hop? Because hip hop now, as we see it in 2021, is that sex sells. And so if sex sells and they're mimicking that in a way that they're being authentic to that, versus like something in K-pop where they're not necessarily talking about sex, because I don't think they will be able to, but they are taking on elements that you can see throughout all of hip hop, whether from the 1970s all the way to 2000s, where it's about the rhyming, it's about spitting the bars, whatever the bars is. You could be talking about like you fall in love with a tree, but you still rhyme in a way that's like, oh my gosh, eloquent. Or like, you know, you have like some sort of musical elements that are very similar, like DJ mixing, for example, that's very similar to what hip hop was before, versus like what is now. I hope I'm making sense, because there's something that I'm trying to like illustrate in terms of like authenticity, because I know we're talking about cultural appropriation, but then the question of like, if they are appropriating accurately what they see currently, is that a problem? I'm asking the question. I'm not giving my own opinion, but I'm asking the question for you all to like engage with that dialogue, where it's like they are engaging in what we already see. So it's like, how can we, you know, tell them what they're doing is wrong when we also see people who look like us, Kay, in our own community doing the same thing? And that's what is making up the current hip hop, while also recognizing that there are underground artists and lesser known artists who are not doing that. But the mainstream hip hop is, and if that is what they're following, are they being true to that? Are they being authentic to that? And if they are, why do we need the K? Going back to our second or third episode about what is the K symbolizing? And that's also getting at Rye's point, but I'm going to stop so that Kay can jump in and Rye afterwards. But that's kind of what I was thinking about in relation to authenticity and cultural appropriation.
No, you said a lot of things there, Chai, that literally my mind is literally like a bubble. There's so many thoughts going on in it at once. But I first want to talk about kind of the difference between emulation and appropriation, right? There are so many people that aspire to be like someone. Say if you love Michael Jackson. I'm just using myself as an example. I grew up loving Michael Jackson. I could tell you every song he made. I knew every move he made in the music video. And to me, I wanted to emulate him because I felt that he was a good person. I felt that he was very talented, and the things that he was doing was good, right? But maybe I didn't have that distinction of whether or not what he was doing was good or bad, right? I didn't grow up in the same household as Michael Jackson, didn't know much about his past. Well, as I got older, I did, right? And then I guess now I can make a more cognizant decision of saying, well, whoa, maybe I wouldn't have loved Michael Jackson that hard, right? And I'm not saying that, again, like I'm tearing down his reputation, but I'm using that as an example, right? Things that we grow up on and that we aspire to be, or the things that we kind of relate to in a way, or that we just admire from afar, something that we want. I don't know, I'm speaking for myself. And I say that to say that for me, that would be more so emulation, right? You see someone who's using their craft and that they're growing in their art, so that for me, that's something that I can aspire to. But then appropriation is that then in a turn, like, am I all of a sudden going to start going on social media and saying that I'm related to the Jacksons, and I I'm living this lifestyle that is not my own. I'm like racking up debt just to put on this facade that I am a Jackson, and like Michael Jackson is like my long lost relative, and I have all these talents and all these great things because of him. But then I go on around and turn and say, well, I am the new Michael Jackson. Like Michael Jackson doesn't exist anymore, right? And people in my little bubble and community can say, wow, like what you're doing is so new, it's so fresh. Like I can't believe it. I've never heard of this Michael Jackson person, but like I heard of you, so I think you're pretty dope. And you start gaining a following, and you start like seeing people like love what you do, and they forget the fact that, or not even know the fact that you have borrowed something from someone simply because you thought what you were doing was emulation. Then you started appropriating things that were profitable to them, their image, their talent. Like, and imagine Michael Jackson wasn't as famous as he was. I could be simply stealing a part of his success without even recognizing it, simply because that's someone that I aspire to be. And I feel like people don't understand the difference between the two. And that's just to your point, Chai, about like, is what South Korea doing is a misnomer for kind of like their lack of the ignorance, right? Just like if you like something and you want to do it, who's going to tell me I can't do it? And I'm not trying to play devil's advocate, but if I was in South Korea growing up there, and I see hip hop as something that's up and coming, and that like there's a lifestyle behind it, like people are getting rich for being in hip hop or doing music. People are getting, are probably looking a lot different than like the norm. They live life very differently. That seems very attracting. I probably wouldn't think too much about it, honestly. I probably would be like, oh, so this artist that I followed said that he likes so and so's music, so I'm gonna listen to so and so because he said he likes it. And now all of a sudden I'm someone who's down for hip hop, like I'm starting to use lingo that I don't use on a day-to-day basis with my friends, and then I'm putting them on, or I'm starting to build a presence on social media for following this type of music, right? It becomes like a domino effect, almost like I don't know why I'm using this as a pyramid scheme. Not trying to say that like that hip hop is a pyramid scheme, but I do think the way that it's being mobilized and how people are becoming so quick to take on the aesthetics of Black culture, that being hair, fashion, and calling it what it is in their own context, in their own cultural context. Like street fashion in South Korea, that be bucket hats and the Adidas tracksuits, and like listening to cassette tapes through headsets and things like that. Like all of these like older fashioned things that are emblems of Black culture that are now being profitable in South Korea with all of these street brands like gaining tons of money. I don't know. And I feel like we've also talked about kind of like now Black artists are linking up with Korean artists for features, and they are now making it cool. Like, okay, dope. Like I see this, Korean dude who's a rapper, and he's rapping about things I rap about. That's dope. But then how would you feel if someone else became more profitable than you are? So, and you are a Black person that's made nothing off of the same type of music that you make, but it's cool when somebody else does it. It almost seems like I'm a kid in like recess, and some kids have like fresh kicks, and I want those fresh kicks, and the grass looks greener on the other side for them. But I've been doing the same thing for years over here. And not to say that I'm sitting here and judging K-pop or K-hip-hop. Why do I keep saying K-pop? But I mean, they kind of fall under the same umbrella sometimes, like, the way that they kind of move around society, even as a subculture, right? They do have their own ways of living and like own set of social norms. But again, like Chai mentioned before in our previous conversation, is that like it's not enough though to like change society. It's not enough to like all of a sudden make how should I say, make certain things kind of more acceptable. Like I don't think we would be hearing hip hop on the radio at some point in South Korea. I don't know, the hip hop that I listen to, maybe not the hip hop that's like Notorious B.I.G. or Tupac or things like that. I don't know. Honestly, I haven't listened to the Korean radio, so I could be wrong. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But before I go off on a tangent, I think to just go back to your question, Chai, is that like it's hard for me as a Black woman to say that this is cultural appropriation when it could be easy enough for me to say that, if that makes sense. Like I'm noticing someone else from a different culture who might be profiting off of something that I could have probably did just as easily, but not have gained such popularity or things like that. Simply because I'm in America and I live in New York and there's so many people who are doing the same thing like me. But in South Korea, there might not be that many people, so you might be able to hit that wave at the right time and like become a person that is able to represent hip hop culture through the likes of Show Me the Money, or you might have spent several years underground, and then you're like, well, I want to come mainstream now. Let me go ahead and like do this real quick, this quick money grab, and participate in hip hop. And that's not what hip hop is, right? It's not a financial institution. But that does kind of contradict what I was mentioning earlier, in the way that it does kind of like move money. It's a market. It definitely teaches people fast ways to get money, either through hip hop songs, or that being through the way that now the music industry has formulated itself through social media and streaming online and things like that. So I do think that there's a huge transformation happening. But before I go any further in a tangent, I know that Rai, you have something that you want to add as well, because I don't want us to fall off the rails here. But yeah, I'll stop there. I think my mind is like still trying to formulate an argument that I feel like it's true to me. If I was to see someone that doesn't look like me participate in Black culture in a way that's offensive, but I might not find offensive, could be problematic. So I'm gonna stop myself right there.
Okay, I think that you brought up a really wonderful point about emulating versus appropriating. I found that actually really fascinating. It gave me a lot to think about. And I do wonder if, a lot of these mainstream Korean hip hop artists believe that what they're doing is emulating, right? Out of a true appreciation for the art or for the culture. But then I am left to wonder, based on Chai's earlier argument, or it wasn't even so much an argument as a framing of a question, right, about authenticity. I am not really part of any hip hop scene. The only way that I really partook in hip hop throughout my life is that I was a break dancer back in the day. I say that as if I'm like 50. Oh my God, I'm not. But from what I have seen on social media in particular, you see things even if you're not really part of those circles. They just pop up. There they are. You see what your friend liked and who that person is and what they like and so on. I've seen a large conversation going on in American hip hop circles about the state of modern hip hop, right? And about the state of rap. What does make money? I've seen questions about, are these rappers who both objectify women or objectify themselves or focus on monetary gains rather than social truths and things like that, are they, betraying the basics of what hip hop was meant to be? I've seen that conversation happening a lot. And I can't necessarily point to names for who in American hip hop is representing, you know, the different styles or perspectives in rap. I mostly just see the monetary and objectification stuff. I guess that's the more mainstream. But with that being said, I mean, and try, if I'm taking your argument too far or your question too far, let me know. But I guess it raises the question of like, is American rap even authentic to American rap?
Right. That is I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, is
no, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about. Like, so for those of you who are watching, you probably got this already, but like we have like our own like, private conversation about what we're gonna have the conversation for the podcast. And the thing that was in the back of my head, for most of the conversation as we were thinking about cultural appropriation, authenticity, was that, right? Like a modern day hip hop, for the most part, mainstream rapping, let me start there, mainstream hip hop has not been true, arguably, to the fundamental aspects of the original version of hip hop, or what hip hop was supposed to be. And so for me, and I'm also, I have bullet points in my head, so I also want to make sure that I get to what Kay was saying. But like for me, like how can we hold, non-Black artists accountable if our own musical genre is not held accountable? But at the same time, that's the first question. But at the same time, that doesn't excuse though certain elements that we do see in K-pop and in K-hip hop. In what we call cultural appropriation or just highly problematic is the question, but like it's still in a way arguably for some people wrong. And the reason why I bring this up is also I'm trying to tie in Kay's comment, because Kay, like you said, like if you as an individual don't find this problematic, is it problematic, right? And for me, it's like I can recognize that me and you are two different people, agreeing and disagreeing. I don't know how to put this because I don't want to say like just because you don't find it problematic doesn't mean it's not problematic. But there is a conversation to be had that there are people who do find it problematic, even if there are others. Like I'm in a group chat with individuals who got a job in Japan, and we're all talking about our experiences with music, right? Because it was an individual who was like, "Give me all the songs that you like." And somebody was like, "Oh, I like K-pop." And I was like, "Ooh, what kind of K-pop you like? Like what songs?" Like I'm not a crazy K-pop fan. But I'm like, what do you listen to? Right. And then another individual who was of African American descent. She's African American. What am I saying? And she was talking about how like she listens to mostly K-hip hop, right? K-rap. And she was like, they're great. They're the best. I found nothing problematic with what they saying. I relate to it. Da, 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 da. So I think about her, right? In a way, like K, your comment kind of aligns with this, even if that's not necessarily like your original opinion. But in a way, it aligns with that, where it's like she doesn't find anything problematic as of right now with the musical the music that she's listening to, right? Like she's enjoying it. She doesn't see anything problematic. She relates to it. Versus there are other people that I've grown up with who we talk about K-pop all the time, and we do find something problematic. So there is a conversation to be had about just because one doesn't find one problematic and another one doesn't make one not have that conversation, if that makes sense, right? I almost lost the point because I'm also getting distracted with my brother's computer. I don't know if you hear it. But I'm just thinking about like, if they are Korean hip hop right now, in a way, because they are copying, let's say they are emulating, like what they see with the American hip hop, if they are emulating to it, they are being authentic to that whole realm, right? They're literally word for word style by style, emulating what they see. But not all emulations are good emulations. And so for me, like, they could be emulating, and that point is really true. They could be emulating, but they could be emulating in a way that could participate in the further objectification of Black people. That could be furthering the I said that already, objectification, the sexualization, the fetishization of Black people. They could be emulating without really understanding that these people are people, like Black people are people. So when they see a Black person, they could automatically make a connection between, like, all Black people are good dancers because that's all I see. All Black people are great rappers because that's all I see. So in a way, like, I think cultural appropriation, because cultural appropriation is more in line of, like, you know, you're making something like a subculture popular and getting the credit for it, or you're taking an aspect of a culture that is a minority in your own larger nation, and you are popularized and appreciated for it, while the people who, like I was saying before, are not, when that culture is came from them. And so I take your point, Kay, that there is a difference between emulation and the cultural appropriation, but it doesn't make emulation better. That's kind of what I'm thinking of. I'm sorry if I got all fuzzled. I had bullet points. Trust me, I had bullet points. I just got distracted with my brother. I love him, but he's playing a video game and I'm just hearing it and I'm like, bro. But that's where I'm coming from. I said 2 points. I hope the 2 points make sense. Let me know if you need me to clarify anything like that. But yeah, I'm gonna stop here so Ryan, you can jump in. But I'm gonna think more about your point, Kay, because I think you do have your point was really great and is very valid. So I'm just, like, thinking about, like, what else I could add.
Yeah, I think you expanded upon that a lot for me, and that made me think of a question that Kay raised at one point about who's responsible for educating, right, these Korean rappers. And not to hyperfixate on this Chancellor video, but since originally watching that video, I have learned that Chancellor was raised in America. I think he was born in Seoul, and then very shortly after he moved to America and was raised there. He's Korean American. And I think I see 2 issues with the idea of, not that either of you were saying that the emulation that is happening is always good, right? But if someone were to say that, I would see 2 issues. Those being that in the Korean sociocultural context, at least, hip hop is not a lifelong lifestyle for most of these people, right? It's a trend, it's a fad, it's very much hip. It's mainstream, it's front and center, it's fashion. But it's not, a lot of these people who partake in that sort of subcultural aesthetic now will likely retire it at a point in time where it's deemed no longer appropriate for them, right? And so that creates this idea that rather than all of these things being truly authentic to them and as people, they may be kind of a form of youth culture almost, right? The youth love a trend. There are a lot of things that people our age and younger partake in that we know when I'm 50, this will not be a thing. I might look back fondly, but I won't still do that. And then I also think about, second point, the main legitimizers that I see of Korean hip hop are Korean Americans, right? And that's interesting because they're often being taken as like the authority on hip hop because they're American, not because they're African American, because they're not. And not because they actually were raised in an environment where hip hop was pervasive. So we can think about this as like Chancellor, putting him on blast all day today. Jay Park, who actually started out in your run-of-the-mill K-pop group, 2 p.m. And then he was kicked out and he was like, you know what? I'm going to be a rapper in like the ultimate hip hop style emulation kind of to the point where I see a lot of people making jokes about how, wow, Jay Park wants to be black so he has since adopted like the use of AAVE, and he does his hair in traditionally black hairstyles, and he has I guess what you might call like hip hop mannerisms. All of these things he didn't have them originally. These have developed in the last few years. And as far as these Korean Americans being actors for legitimization, like, who's to say they're how to say this? They could be commodifying just as much as someone born and raised in Korea, right? They could see a use in investing in this association between America and rap, rather than really being a part of the American cultural, like African American cultural context. And yeah, at least nowadays, I don't think that Jay Park says the N-word. I'm pretty sure he's done it before.
I don't know. I haven't heard. I just remember that one.
I'm pretty certain.
Yes.
I'm pretty certain.
Because I remember that like one BuzzFeed video where like he was reading Thirst Streets. Mm-hmm. Oh no, sorry, not Thirst Streets. He was like he had to he got like a lyric and he had to guess what like song it came from, like what rap song it came from, and I think the album, something like that. And one of the lyrics had the word N-word, like had the N-word in it. And he was like da 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 da, friend, da 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 da. And so like I remember that, and I was like, okay, I don't know, like he obviously did it because he was like aware of like by him saying it what kind of backlash he would get. But I don't follow Jay Park, so I don't know his history with the word. Like it could be like one of those things where he probably said it and he learned from it, or it could be one of those things where like, you know, he said it but he doesn't say it out loud in public because he knows he would get backlash. But he could be like nigga 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 all day with his friends, off screen. So like I don't know, you know what I mean? Cause exactly, Kay, because you never know, because like people's online or in media presence could be different from how they are off screen. So like I don't know how he is as a person. We'll probably never know. But just thinking about that is like kind of when you was listening all the things that Jay Park does, I was like, at least he doesn't say the N-word. As far as I know.
But I mean, that's the thing. Like, I feel like a lot of people in the Asian community that were very close to the Black community kind of find that they have that privilege to say it. And they might not be rappers. They could just be a neighbor. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to stop there because.
If they have like that one Black friend that said it was
Right.
okay.
Right.
Right. Well, I done X, Y, and Z, so that gives me a pass,
Yes.
right?
And
it's like we're all minorities, so we should all work together and like fight the same battle. But I'm like, you clearly have a privilege that I do not have. That be coming from a culture of people that have significant amount of wealth in Asia, in Korea specifically, although that there is some sort of conversation to be had about like their economic prowess and how they got there for sure. But after like history of like poverty, and which is very true for us knowing about like the Japanese imperialism in that time, and like the stripping of rights and the stripping of culture for a lot of Korean people and a lot of the Korean ancestries. So I mean, there's a lot to be said about that. Not to say that therefore the things that they're saying in their hip hop songs is authentic because they have that history, but it's not connected to what we're talking about. It's not connected to how is the Black struggle similar to the Asian struggle all the way in Asia. Like, and I've seen a lot of like, now I'm thinking of like Shada Spence. He's an Asian American rapper, and he's from New Jersey, and he uses African American vernacular, but I've never seen him curse. I've never seen him use the N-word. But then again, that's just like you said, his media presence. He seems pretty woke, and he seems very well versed in what's happening within the Black community, that being Black Lives Matter and things like that, yet not erasing his own identity to, I believe he is Vietnamese, but I'm not completely sure about his background. But at the same time, like, there is a responsibility, and I think that's what we're trying to say, is that like regardless of how attached you may be to Black culture, don't isolate that from your responsibility of acting with knowledge of knowing how this affects the Black community. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if you have a close friend that says, "Oh, I don't listen to hip hop," think about how they might feel if you feel the need to say something about someone in a derogatory way to Black people, about Black people using these terms. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's this profound ignorance that I have with it that I think that might contradict what I said earlier about the difference between emulation and appropriation. Yes, there's definitely no good in emulation whatsoever, because what that simply demonstrates is the ignorance, the lack of knowledge, the lack of education. And I see that there are like people taking measures, and I feel like we've talked about this video before, where a woman came in and held a workshop for this up and coming female K-pop group about the aesthetics that like Korean groups are like normally used to fashioning, that being dreads and box braids and hair extensions, things like that, and like do rags and all that stuff. They were being educated about that, and like their responses to it was like, "Whoa, like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know where this came from. I had no idea." You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't have that educational background. So at the same time, like, I can't patronize them any longer for that fact, but I also can't continue to place the blame at the same time. Does that make sense? Like, patronizing them as far as like, "Oh, well, you get a pass," but then also I cannot turn around and say, "Oh, like, I'm gonna blame you for the way that you have perpetuated Black culture within South Korea." I feel like they're both saying the same thing. I feel like one of them is not negating, but yes, one on the other hand is a bad idea. The one on the other hand is like, well, you didn't know any better, so I don't know. I will just leave it at that. I feel like there's definitely more to be said about that. But Chai, I know you want to send us off.
Yeah. So like there have been a lot of parts of the conversation that we have brought up. Some of them may be confusing for our viewers because we were also working through it. And I think like maybe next conversation, I don't know if we have decided for that, but I think we can touch on a little bit of other things as we get more time to like really think more about it. Because we were thinking that there's a lot more that we brought up in this conversation I think could span into another conversation. We're still in a way talking about authenticity to it's like K-pop's relationship to hip hop, but we were looking at the subunit K-hip hop. Also, we haven't even touched upon Japan and Japanese subculture a lot. We touched on it a little bit. There are some differences, but there are some similarities. So I think another point of conversation for next time is to look at those similarities and thinking about like how K-pop exists in Korean culture, in Korean musical culture versus how it exists in Japanese musical culture. And I think it will be interesting to look at. It's not necessarily is one more authentic than the other, but what aspects of both of them are problematic and fruitful, which ones are great and which ones are not so great. So we're going to stop our conversation for today, and hopefully we will touch on a lot more. We will come back actually to these conversations, to these points for next time and see the relationships. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching us. I hope you gained some knowledge, gained some questions, had some questions of your own that you were able to create yourselves. And we hope to see you all next week. So thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.